Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. Even the Saint Emperor and the Vile Emperor would be apprehensive to speak to Bai Xiaochun in such a way. Only the little turtle would possibly have the gall to do so. Bai Xiaochun's jaw dropped. Then, even as the little turtle's voice continued to echo out, Bai Xiaochun took a step backward and vanished. A moment later, he appeared next to some ornamental rocks roughly 300 meters behind where he had been standing moments before. Reaching out in front of him, he made a grasping motion. As he did, the air around him shattered, and a scream could be heard. The little turtle appeared, little more than a string of afterimages as he accelerated with shocking speed. However, this was not the same Bai Xiaochun from the past. Snorting coldly, he took a step forward, which caused everything in the area to seemingly fold in on itself. It almost looked like water rippling. Then everything returned to normal. He had performed something like a sealing magic, except vastly more powerful, locking down the entire area. No matter how the little turtle tried to accelerate, he only ended up slowing down. His eyes lit up with incredulity, and he struggled mightily, but was unable to escape the hand which then clamped down onto him. Bai Xiaochun felt immeasurably proud of himself. After all the years which had passed, this was his first time he had successfully caught the little turtle before he could escape. Holding him up in front of his face, he said, "What did you just say, little turtle?" "I didn't hear clearly." The little turtle was clearly stunned, but at the same time, was not one to accept defeat easily. Glaring, he prepared to let loose a string of insults. Before he could, Bai Xiaochun, who was far too familiar with him, shook him back and forth violently. In response, the turtle shrieked, "O venerated master, owner of mine, Lord Bai, stop shaking me. Damn it, since when did you get so strong? I was just joking around. How could I possibly put a turtle mark on your son, Lord Bai? I would never. My love for him knows no bounds. Ha ha ha, come on, we haven't seen each other for a long time, how could I not joke around a bit?" His pleas fell on deaf ears, though, as Bai Xiaochun continued to shake him around. "You were supposed to stay in the Saint Emperor dynasty. What did you run away for? Thanks to you, my entire love letter collection is gone." The mere thought of the love letters immediately caused Bai Xiaochun's heart to sink. At this point, the little turtle couldn't help but be angry. "You think I wanted to run away? Everything was going great in the Saint Emperor dynasty. But then you came and said that if I stuck around for a bit longer, you would proclaim me the god of beasts." "God of beasts? That sounds way better than Saint Turtle. You know how long I sat around waiting, hoping, wishing you would come? But you never did, so of course I had to come looking for you." With each sentence, the little turtle spoke with greater resolve. And by the end, he was glaring directly at Bai Xiaochun, who glared right back at him. A tense moment passed, whereupon Bai Xiaochun started laughing. He was obviously aware that the turtle had been joking with him. And the turtle knew that he had also been joking. Even as the two of them laughed, Bai Xiaochun released his grip. Whatever. Henceforth, you are the Arch-Emperor dynasty's god of beasts." Even as the words left his mouth, a strange power was unleashed that not even Bai Xiaochun was aware of. As a result, the little turtle shivered, and then his eyes began to shine brightly. Apparently, an invisible natural law was at work, which was imbuing him with strange powers. All of a sudden, the little turtle began to emit dazzling light. "Woohoo!" the little turtle shouted, flying around in delight. Bai Xiaochun continued to chuckle. Although he didn't want to cause problems for the Saint Emperor because of the little turtle, now that the little turtle had come back of his own accord, he wouldn't betray him by giving him away. However, he still needed to consider matters as a whole. Make sure to keep a low profile. Keep your head down. It would be really annoying if the Saint Emperor came back looking for you. With that, he ignored the excited little turtle and headed back into the palace. After checking on his children, and spending some time chatting with Song Junwan and Zhou Zimo, he contentedly went into seclusion to work on his cultivation. After all, although his previous session had ended successfully, he had not yet completed all the work that needed to be done to perfect his future will. First, he spent some time working out the various details that needed to be handled. Then, he went to work, calling upon the powers of the technique, which had already become somewhat instinctual to him. At this point, he began to formulate the divine ability that would be the manifestation of the third level of the time immemorial codex. I have my Sutra of the former and my Sutra of the present. My third divine ability should be a Sutra of the future. When it came to his Sutra of the former and Sutra of the present, the previous limits of his cultivation base meant that he had been unable to release their true and ultimate level of power. But now that he had Archean battle prowess, he was confident that the other two sutras would be even more shocking than before. Furthermore, because of how infrequently he had used them, they definitely fell into the category of trump cards. He had put a lot of thought into his Sutra of the future, which made things go much more smoothly now that he was actually working on it. Sitting down cross-legged, he began to perform auguries, speeding them up with his sovereign aura. In some ways, it was actually like working on a medicine formula. Half a year sped by in a blur. It had been a year since he had used up his Archean luminescence during his fight with the Vile Emperor, which meant that he now had those 15 shots back at his disposal. Now that he had a safety net of sorts, it made it a lot easier to focus on his auguries. A few more months passed. One evening as he sat there in his private chamber, he suddenly opened his eyes, within which was something that looked like a red flower, in the midst of blooming. The flower was formed from numerous tiny magical symbols, which interlocked with each other to form the shape of a flower. Upon closer inspection, it looked very much like the legendary Paramita lily which grew in the land of the dead. 2. As the bright red Paramita lily took shape, Bai Xiaochun's aura began to transform significantly, growing emptier, as though it didn't belong in the world. Eventually, he bowed his head, and lifted his right hand. As he did, the red magical symbols which made up the Paramita flower began to shine with dazzling light, which swirled onto his palm to create a bright red Paramita lily. This is the divine ability for the third level of my time immemorial codex, the Sutra of Future Paramita. As for how strong it is, he suddenly vanished, to appear within Gongsun Wanner's official residence. She was still in secluded meditation, working on recovering from her injuries, a type of cultivation that wasn't harmful to interrupt. If he wanted to, he could mask his presence from her, making it impossible for her to detect him. However, he did not. He let his aura spread out, and when she sensed him, her eyes opened, and she saw the red Paramita lily in his hand. Almost immediately, she felt herself being attracted to the flower, which clearly emanated a feeling of death. In fact, the longer she looked at it, the more she began to pant, as though the flower contained some mysterious force which she found impossible to resist. Bai Xiaochun didn't say anything in response. Waving his finger at her, he sent the Paramita lily flying toward her with such speed that she couldn't dodge out of the way. As soon as it hit her, it sank into her body. This is a new divine ability of mine. Go ahead and attack me. With that, he stood there silently, a faint smile on his face. Gongsun Wanner hesitated for a moment, then her eyes flickered as she performed an incantation gesture and waved her finger at him. Instantly, a stream of black smoke filled with evil ghosts shot toward Bai Xiaochun, which then slammed into his chest. As he stood there unmoving, Gongsun Wanner staggered backward, clutching at her own chest. Thankfully, she had only used 80% of her power in her attack. Looking at him incredulously, she said, "How could this be happening?" This divine ability is called the Sutra of Future Paramita. By implanting a Paramita lily into my enemy, I create a connection to them. Whenever I'm injured, they are also injured. Of course, injuries I inflict on an opponent will likewise return to me. Bai Xiaochun was completely confident in his Sutra of the Future. After all, he had put a lot of thought into how to make the technique truly roguish. With his tough fleshly body, and powers of regeneration, any opponent he faced would definitely be unlucky, and would hurt themselves merely by landing a blow on him. "So, what do you think?" he asked proudly, waving his hand to extract the red Paramita lily from her. Actually, there was a second usage of the Sutra of the Future that was even more shocking. He could intentionally injure himself to inflict wounds on his opponent. After gritting her teeth for a long moment, she slowly said, "It's completely shameless." With that, she waved her hand to dismiss him. He rubbed his nose awkwardly. Seeing that she wasn't interested in talking with him further, he went back to his private chamber. As time marched on, he would occasionally spend time with his family, but focused mainly on cultivation and 23-colored flame. Obviously, he had not given up on multicolored flame. And although he had not yet reached the point of being confident enough to resurrect Bai Hao, he still felt confident in being able to succeed eventually. The sun and moon seemed to become a blur as 2 years passed. Although he didn't achieve a cultivation-based breakthrough, he made steady progress. Dabao and Xiaoxiao were growing up strong and healthy. Song Junwan and Zhou Zimo often rolled their eyes because of the names Bai Xiaochun had given them, and had repeatedly tried to convince him to change them. However, he wouldn't budge on the issue. Eventually, the two women simply got used to the names. And the names didn't have any negative influence on the cultivation progress of the mothers. Thanks to the nearly endless resources they had access to, Song Junwan broke through to the Diva realm, and Zhou Zimo eventually reached the demigod realm. However, compared to Hu Xiaomei, they were actually a bit slow. With Gongsun Wan'er's help, Hu Xiaomei made rapid progress. In 2 short years, she climbed from the mid-diva realm to the late diva realm. Soon, she would catch up to Zhou Zimo and become a demigod. Unfortunately, it was to Hu Xiaomei's displeasure that she didn't get any sense that she was pregnant. Despite the fact that she had learned from Song Junwan that it took quite some time for any effects to appear, Hu Xiaomei was too nervous, and went to visit Bai Xiaochun privately on numerous occasions. Over the course of the 2 years, more and more Heavenspan realm cultivators flocked to the Arch-Emperor dynasty, which was flourishing. The population rose, with spirit enhancement becoming the pillar of the nation. More and more grandmasters arose, becoming famous in all of the eternal immortal domains. Because of the peace treaty, relations with the Saint Emperor dynasty and Vile Emperor dynasty were good. The only downside was that the Arch-Emperor dynasty only had one celestial, Gongsun Wan'er. The Grand Heaven Master had been in the great circle of the demigod realm for many years, but was always wrapped up in affairs of state. However, now that the Arch-Emperor dynasty was on the right track, both Bai Xiaochun and Gongsun Wan'er urged him to focus more on cultivation. With their help, and the addition of certain immortal pills that Bai Xiaochun provided from his treasured fan, the Grand Heaven Master finally reached the point of a breakthrough. It was very important to Bai Xiaochun, a major milestone for the Grand Heaven Master himself, and something vital for the Arch-Emperor dynasty as a whole. Only by increasing the number of celestials could they possibly ensure that their nation was truly strong. Much to Bai Xiaochun's delight, the Giant Ghost King was also reaching the point of a breakthrough. Earlier, the Giant Ghost King had not been making such quick progress, and Bai Xiaochun had assumed that the War Champion King would actually be the first to break through. However, he had forgotten about how cautious the Giant Ghost King was. The Giant Ghost King couldn't stop thinking about how his grandson was the highest-ranking prince in the nation, and that left him feeling very nervous. In his view, his most important mission now was to make sure his grandson was safe. As one of the 4 heavenly kings of the wildlands, he knew exactly how imperial dynasties worked. It was not unheard of for a concubine to kill the highest-ranking prince in order to have her own son earn the right of inheritance. Bai Xiaochun would have little or no control over such situations. And therefore, there was only one way for the Giant Ghost King to ensure that his grandson was entirely worthy to hold the position of Grand Prince. He needed to become a celestial. Only by being a celestial could he truly watch over and protect his grandson. After all, he knew that Bai Xiaochun had a lot of dubious relationships with various female companions, and could very well have more children in the future. It wouldn't be impossible for some spectacularly talented rival to appear in the future. The biggest threat of all was probably Gongsun Wan'er. It was common knowledge in the Arch-Emperor dynasty that she and Bai Xiaochun had an unusual relationship. Such rumors had been floating around since the day Bai Xiaochun first arrived in Saint Emperor City. Furthermore, the fact that the Grand Heaven Master seemed to want to play the matchmaker caused the Giant Ghost King to feel even more nervous. If Gongsun Wan'er becomes a part of the imperial harem, and gives birth to another son, then considering that she's a celestial, it could be a big threat to my grandson. Out of fear of that very circumstance, the Giant Ghost King held nothing back in his attempts to further his cultivation. Bai Xiaochun had no idea what was going on in the Giant Ghost King's mind, so when he saw him advancing by leaps and bounds, he was very taken aback. At the same time, the War Champion King, 9 Serenities King, and Spirit Advent King, as well as the Eastern and Northern demigods, were also surprised, and went into secluded meditation to pursue breakthroughs of their own. Bai Xiaochun was very pleased with all of that. With so many impending breakthroughs, it seemed that a new era was on the way for the Arch-Emperor dynasty. 3 months later, the Grand Heaven Master's celestial tribulation arrived. Thanks to all of the vast preparations the Grand Heaven Master had made, he passed his tribulation with ease. After all, he had been the 3rd most powerful expert in the Heavenspan realm, after the Gravekeeper and Taoist Heavenspan. Although the tribulation he incited was not as shocking as Bai Xiaochun's, it was terrifying to behold. However, he didn't need any outside assistance. Soon, the voice of the Eternal Mother spoke into the ears of all the living beings in the Eternal Lands, provoking cheers within the Arch-Emperor dynasty. Because Gongsun Wan'er was not actually from the Heavenspan realm, that meant that Bai Xiaochun was their first celestial, and the Grand Heaven Master was the second. The Grand Heaven Master took a portion of his Dao seed and gave it to Bai Xiaochun, which he enshrined in the Imperial Palace. Not long after the Grand Heaven Master achieved his breakthrough, the people of the eternal immortal domains were again shaken by the Arch-Emperor dynasty when the giant Ghost King's celestial tribulation came. Unlike the Grand Heaven Master, the giant Ghost King had pushed forward too recklessly, and as his tribulation began, it became clear that he was destined to fail. The giant Ghost King knew that, but was convinced that Bai Xiaochun wouldn't let it happen. First the Grand Heaven Master stepped in to assist, and even Gongsun Wan'er helped. Finally, when that wasn't enough, Bai Xiaochun sighed and performed a right-handed incantation gesture, causing a crimson Paramita lily to appear. After the flower entered the giant Ghost King's body, the ill effects of the tribulation were transferred to Bai Xiaochun. Because of that assistance, the giant Ghost King's tribulation became much easier. And thus, despite nearly being killed, the giant Ghost King passed his tribulation. As the voice of the Eternal Mother spoke to all living beings, the giant Ghost King struggled to his feet, threw his head back, and laughed uproariously. The Arch-Emperor dynasty had another celestial. From now on, the Arch-Emperor dynasty would have 3 celestials. Although that still wasn't as much as the other 2 imperial dynasties, they were now catching up. When small-scale friction arose, it wouldn't always fall to Gongsun Wan'er to handle matters. The Grand Heaven Master and Giant Ghost King would now be able to join the fighting. Furthermore, upon discovering how useful Bai Xiaochun's future will was, the Grand Heaven Master created a whole set of plans that would culminate in the War Champion King and other demigod experts getting a chance to become celestials. The Saint Emperor dynasty and the Vile Emperor dynasty took the matter very seriously. Obviously, when it came to a fighting force of celestials, it wouldn't be long before the Arch-Emperor dynasty was in a very good position. Despite that knowledge, there was little the other 2 dynasties could do about the situation. In his fear, the Saint Emperor chose to try to maintain the best relations possible with Bai Xiaochun, whereas the Vile Emperor went into secluded meditation. Despite the increased threat the Arch-Emperor dynasty posed within the eternal immortal domains, there were no negative repercussions. They only continued to grow in terms of power and glory. It was a huge boost to the demigods who were currently working toward a breakthrough. All of them went crazy in their cultivation, aided by the Grand Heaven Master and Bai Xiaochun, and the medicinal pills they provided. Their progress was rapid, to say the least. As the Arch-Emperor dynasty continued to grow and develop, 5 years passed. By this point, Bai Dabao and Bai Xiaoxiao were both 7 years old. They were beautiful children, with charming dimples that appeared whenever they smiled or laughed. Bai Xiaoxiao's eyes were particularly bright, and from the look of things, she was going to be exceedingly attractive when she grew up. As for Bai Dabao, he was pure and fair, and had a stubborn air to him. Everyone in Arch-Emperor City loved the children, and treated them like they were chosen from the heavens. The imperial palace was their playground, and they were constantly being chased around by special guards and female cultivators, who were always telling them to slow down and stop running. The children had been born with shocking natural talents, to the point where even the Grand Heaven Master was shocked. By the time they were 7, they already had core formation cultivation bases. And Bai Xiaoxiao, who was the older sister, was in late core formation. When it came to fleshly body power, Bai Xiaoxiao's was rather ordinary, but Bai Dabao had already reached the nascent soul level. In terms of personality, neither of them were very much like Bai Xiaochun. Bai Xiaoxiao had a fiery temper, whereas Bai Dabao was impulsive, and didn't seem the least bit afraid of dying. In fact, he was curious about everything, and loved challenging people to fights. Bai Xiaochun noticed these things early on, and tried to correct their errant behavior. Unfortunately, no amount of persuasion on his part did any good. Neither child was the least bit afraid of him. Conversely, they were terrified of Song Junwan and Zhou Zimo. And Bai Dabao, who wasn't afraid of anything else in the world, was most definitely afraid of his older sister. In an out-of-the-way location within the imperial palace, Bai Xiaoxiao was currently staring furiously at Bai Dabao. "This is all your fault, Dabao." Bai Dabao stood there, his head hanging, not daring to respond. From the time he had been small all the way until now, when he was 7 years old, he had always suffered at the hands of his sister. He always got the short end of the stick. When the 2 of them caused trouble, it always ended up being his fault, and when they did something praiseworthy, his sister took the credit. From their parents' perspective, she was charming and obedient, but to him, she was a complete and utter tyrant. All it took was for her to start crying, and their parents would rush over to comfort her. Meanwhile, he would be forced to stand there, stunned but stubborn, as his parents scolded him. On the one hand, Bai Dabao admired his sister, but on the other hand, he feared her. At the same time, he loved her. Whenever she found something new and delicious to eat, or something fun to do, she would always think of him first. Thanks to her temptations, he thought of her as the best sister in the whole world. Do you know how long it took me to come up with this plan? Bai Xiaochun said angrily. Do you know how much preparation it took? And you actually showed up late by an entire incense stick's worth of time? If this doesn't work out, Dabao, then I'm definitely going to beat you up. I got held up by my mom. Bai Dabao said, nearly under his breath. I'll definitely try extra hard this time, alright? Bai Xiaochun nodded firmly in response. Waving her hand, she produced an immortal fruit that pulsed with so much spiritual energy it was obviously extraordinary. Bai Dabao's eyes instantly went wide. He knew that the immortal food provided by his father was always particularly beneficial for the fleshly body. And unfortunately, he didn't get many opportunities to eat food like this. When Bai Xiaochun saw the look of anticipation on her brother's face, she smiled. Here, you take it. I don't practice fleshly body cultivation, so this will help you a lot more than me. Bopping her brother on the head, she handed the fruit to him. Bai Dabao eagerly grabbed it and wolfed it down in a single bite. Then he thumped himself on the chest. Don't worry, sis. I'll definitely catch you a really awesome pet this time. Eyebrows shooting up in delight, Xiaoxiao proceeded to drag Dabao through the palace to one particular remote location. There, she produced a little flag from her bag of holding, which she waved through the air, creating a small cloud that the two of them hopped on. Then, the cloud proceeded to fly them out of the palace. Of course, the imperial palace was strictly locked down by a powerful spell formation. However, spell formations were vulnerable to people who were familiar with their operation. And Bai Xiaoxiao was something of a genius when it came to spell formations. After much study, she had identified a weakness, and created this little flag to be able to get through it. Apparently, this was not the first time the two of them had done this. Almost as soon as they vanished, someone stepped out of thin air in the spot they had left from. It was Lu Yuntao, Master God Diviner's Taoist partner, who had been secretly keeping an eye on the children. Shaking her head, she vanished. Lu Yuntao had since officially become a citizen of the Arch-Emperor dynasty, and as one of the few female demigods, had been assigned to oversee the palace maids. As Dabao and Xiaoxiao grew older and more mischievous, and went to greater lengths to get out of the palace, Lu Yuntao had also gone to greater lengths to keep them safe. No matter how many times Song Junwan and Zhou Zimo lectured the children, Xiaoxiao and Dabao never listened, and always managed to find new ways to cause mischief. To Xiaoxiao and Dabao, the rolling plains and endless jungles outside of Arch-Emperor City were the perfect playground. And the numerous vicious beasts that lurked there were the perfect prey. Around evening, Xiaoxiao cheered and Dabao huffed for breath as they dragged a massive anaconda back toward the imperial palace. It had once been the picture of ferocity, but was now covered with wounds. And whenever it struggled, Dabao would punch or kick it viciously, until it eventually just cowered in fear. If you dare to act up, I'll beat you to death. Dabao shouted, behave yourself and be a good pet for my sister. Don't worry, she'll take good care of you. After arriving at the palace, they used Xiaoxiao's flag to get both themselves and the snake back inside. The two of them were convinced that no one was the wiser, but the truth was that Bai Xiaochun had been watching the entire time via divine sense. The fact that, at such a young age, they had actually gone out to capture such a terrifying creature caused a frown to appear on his face. He couldn't help but worry about what disasters might result if they kept doing such things. I know that they're a bit reckless, but I can't believe they actually went out and caught a snake like that. I wouldn't have even thought of doing something so dangerous when I was 7. Snorting coldly, he decided to go teach his children a big lesson. Vanishing from his private chamber, he stepped out of thin air right in front of Xiaoxiao and Dabao. If Song Junwan or Zhou Zimo had appeared, Dabao would have immediately begun to shiver in fear. But considering that it was only his father, he wasn't the least bit afraid at all. He even glared a bit at Bai Xiaochun. Off to the side, Xiaoxiao smiled at him charmingly. Daddy, she said, rushing forward to hug him. Her voice dispelled about 70% of Bai Xiaochun's anger, but he still tried to look angry. Flicking his sleeve, he launched into a quick speech. Xiaoxiao, Dabao, you can't do things like this. You listen to your father. You have to be cautious in everything. You can't be reckless. You only have one life, and you shouldn't ever risk it. Look at me. That's how I've lived my life. And that's the only reason I'm still around today, still working on living forever. If I had been as impulsive as you two, I would have lost my poor little life long ago. In response, Xiaoxiao pouted, and Dabao stomped his foot angrily. I totally disagree, Dad. Dabao said, if anyone gets in my way, I just beat him up. What's the point in making things so complicated? Bai Xiaochun already felt a headache coming on. Over the years, he had repeatedly tried to correct his son's incorrect view of life, but had never succeeded. Xiao was a bit easier to deal with, Dabao was the true headache, and this huge snake was even more evidence of how gutsy he was. And Bai Xiaochun had heard many other stories of things Dabao had done, things that he would never have dared to do at that age. For example, in recent years, ghosts and souls had gradually become more common, possibly because of the rise of the Arch-Emperor dynasty. And yet Dabao had simply gone out and captured some for himself. He had even captured spies sent over by the Vile Emperor dynasty and the Saint Emperor dynasty. And now he had gone and caught a gigantic snake. It was as if these two children actually loved ghosts, snakes, and the like. They didn't seem scared of anything in heaven and earth. And Dabao seemed to jump at the chance to beat up anyone who offended him. On more than one occasion, Bai Xiaochun had actually scanned him with divine sense to make sure he was really his own child. Were it not for the fluctuations within his blood that confirmed he was, Bai Xiaochun would actually have suspected otherwise. The enormous snake that Dabao had captured actually had a high cultivation base, and had developed intelligence many years ago. Because of some certain types of fruits that it had consumed, it also had particularly powerful divine sense. Seeing that the Arch-Emperor seemed to be speaking up for it, it nervously sent out some divine sense to try to beg for mercy. However, as soon as it did, Dabao noticed. "Hey," he shouted, "how dare you interrupt the grown-ups when we're talking? Are you just looking to get a beating?" Eyes shining with ferocious light, he punched and kicked the snake a handful of times. The snake shrieked in terror and humiliation, but couldn't do a single thing. Bai Xiaochun looked on, sighing. "Dabao," he said, feeling a bit sorry for the snake. Sincerely worried about the inappropriate behavior, he was just trying to think of what to say next, and whether or not he should start to act more strictly, when Xiao hurried over and pulled Dabao back. "Dabao, you're supposed to cherish little creatures like that. You can't hit it." Xiao's voice was warm and soft, very pleasant to the ear. However, that was what Dabao feared most in his sister. In fact, he often feared her more than his own mother. Therefore, he immediately backed down and stood there obediently. Planting her hands on her hips, Xiao said, "And you shouldn't be talking to Daddy like that, Dabao. He's worked very hard to give us a happy and peaceful life. You apologize right this minute." When Bai Xiaochun saw all of this happening, his heart softened even further, and he felt more than ever that daughters were the best. He thought of how, even as a newborn, she would always laugh when he held her, and it caused warmth to rise up in his heart. Even as that warmth appeared, Xiao continued to loudly scold Dabao. "Dabao, you know that Daddy has never been very brave. He was like that even when he was a kid. He's scared of dying, and you went and brought in a gigantic snake to scare him." Bai Xiaochun's eyes went wide as he watched his daughter loudly scolding his son. He even started to get a bit dizzy. Just as he had been contemplating how to provide the proper life education for his children, Xiao accused Dabao of using the snake to try to scare him. Bai Xiaochun was simply stunned. "Xiao," he said, "you." Before he could finish, Xiao turned to look at him, a charming, innocent smile on her face as she said, "Daddy, Grandpa Qinghao told me all about those snakes that scared you so much when you were a kid. It was from that moment on that you feared three things in life: death, ghosts, and snakes. Don't be scared, Daddy. I'll teach Dabao a lesson he won't forget because of this." With that, she turned back to Dabao, who was standing there, head hung low. "Dabao, this is very, very wrong. You listen to me. If you ever try to scare our daddy again, I'll beat the crap out of you." Looking quite humiliated, Dabao pouted and quietly said, "I won't scare Daddy ever again, sis." Bai Xiaochun was now completely bowled over. It was like his daughter could instantly fill blue skies with dark thunderclouds. Off to the side, Lu Yuntao was having a hard time holding back from laughing out loud. Wanting to cry, but finding no tears to shed, Bai Xiaochun decided that he really had to establish himself as a figure of fatherly authority. Trying to sound as somber as possible, he said, "Xiao, what you said now was completely incorrect." Thumping himself on the chest, he continued, "Your daddy." But before he could say anything else, Xiao smiled sweetly and hugged his leg. Looking up at him, she spoke in a very comforting tone. "Daddy, don't be scared. Dabao doesn't understand these things, but I'll teach him. Anyway, the two of us already decided a long time ago that before we even grow up, we'll make sure to catch all of the snakes and ghosts in the Arch-Emperor dynasty. By the time we're grown up, we'll have them all cleared out. That way, they won't be able to scare you, Daddy. Don't worry, Dabao and I are here to keep you safe." Xiao seemed to be perfectly sincere in everything she was saying, to the point that Bai Xiaochun's heart twinged in response. As for Dabao, it seemed to take a bit of effort, but he also nodded and said, "Daddy, I'm not sure why you're afraid of snakes and ghosts, but sis is right. From now on, you don't need to be scared. We two are here to keep you safe. We won't let any snakes or ghosts frighten you." What the two children were saying was actually the truth. Although they often snuck out of the palace because they thought it was fun, the real reason was the stories that Li Qinghao had told them of Bai Xiaochun's past. After hearing about the things that scared him, they decided that it was their mission to keep him safe. To hear the children speaking in such a heartfelt fashion caused Lu Yuntao's smile to fade away, leaving her eyes glistening with emotion. Bai Xiaochun was equally moved. Sighing at the realization of what was going on, he decided that now wasn't the time to try to educate his children. Tousling their hair, he turned to leave. But before he did, he looked over his shoulder. "Your grandpa Qinghao is actually wrong. The truth is, your daddy isn't scared of snakes or ghosts. He's actually very brave." Even as the words left his mouth, he heard the sound of throats being cleared behind him. Turning, he found Song Junwan and Zhou Zimo approaching, enigmatic smiles on their faces as they looked at him. Suddenly feeling embarrassed, he came up with a quick excuse to get away. After returning to his private meditation chamber, he sat down and thought back on the conversation. Although he was still moved, he was also worried, and wasn't sure of what to do about the situation. "I guess I can't force them to change their personalities. They need to walk their own path, and make their own future. The only thing I can do is try my best to protect them." He smiled. It's nice to have someone trying to keep you safe, especially when it's your own son and daughter. Taking a deep breath, he closed his eyes and began to perform more auguries regarding 23-colored flame. After all the years he had spent doing research and study, he had reached a state of roughly 90% enlightenment. Now, he only needed to make some minor adjustments and improvements. He was confident that it wouldn't be long before he would perfect the formula for 23-colored flame. Another year passed, and the formula was finished. He opened his eyes excitedly and waved his right hand, causing a mass of souls to erupt from his bag of holding. However, that was when he sensed something very strange from the direction of Gongsun Wanner's official residence. That aura. Something's wrong. The source of the aura was Gongsun Wanner's Immortals Cave. Bai Xiaochun had originally expected to detect the aura of a breakthrough. After all, whenever he spent time in secluded meditation, he would occasionally send some divine sense out into Arch-Emperor City to check on things. And for years now, Gongsun Wanner had been hoping to break through to the mid-celestial realm. That fact was no secret, it was known to Bai Xiaochun, the Grand Heaven Master, and even others. If Bai Xiaochun had not helped Gongsun Wanner supplant Ghost Mother, then given the resources she had built up, she shouldn't have had any problem achieving such a breakthrough. The entire time that Gongsun Wanner had been in the Arch-Emperor dynasty, she had been in seclusion. Although she had fully absorbed Ghost Mother, that was only the first step. And despite the fact that Ghost Mother's consciousness was gone, there were still parts of her that remained. As soon as Bai Xiaochun sensed the aura, he realized that in addition to the signs of an imminent breakthrough, there were also fluctuations that indicated that something was struggling to awaken. And Bai Xiaochun recognized those fluctuations, they belonged to Ghost Mother. Bai Xiaochun's face fell. Now was not the time to worry about conjuring flame, so he flicked his sleeve to gather up all the souls, and then vanished. When he reappeared, he was actually inside Gongsun Wanner's Immortals Cave. There she sat, trembling, her eyes tightly closed. Mist swirled on her face, some of it black, some of it white. The black mist seemed to be in the process of consuming the white mist, and succeeding. Clearly, that black color represented Ghost Mother, and the white represented Gongsun Wanner. At the moment, Bai Xiaochun was the only person in the Arch-Emperor dynasty who realized what was happening, and also the only person who could save Gongsun Wanner. Well, that's fine, he thought. I'll take advantage of the situation to totally crush Ghost Mother, and give Gongsun Wanner complete control. That way, even if she needs to be resurrected by means of her Daoseed, she would still come back as herself. After being absorbed, Ghost Mother's mark still existed, and because she was still part of Gongsun Wanner, Bai Xiaochun would not have been able to erase it even if he wanted to. It would have harmed Ghost Mother, but would also have harmed Gongsun Wanner as well, perhaps irreversibly. Now, Ghost Mother was taking advantage of this critical moment in Gongsun Wanner's breakthrough to try to defeat her. However, that also gave Bai Xiaochun a rare opportunity. Snorting coldly, he reached out and touched her forehead, then sent some divine sense streaming into her sea of consciousness. The waters there were both black and white, with the black side seething and churning as it attempted to overwhelm the white side. Just barely visible within that black seawater was a face that resembled Gongsun Wanner's but was more vicious and burning with ghost chi. That was none other than Ghost Mother's consciousness. There was no face visible within the white side, as though Gongsun Wanner's consciousness was already gone. Bai Xiaochun's divine sense appeared right within the black seawater, amidst thunderous rumblings. Bai Xiaochun, Ghost Mother shouted from within the black water. At the same time, the water began to rise up, transforming into a huge giant. Filled with rage, she reached out toward Bai Xiaochun, hoping to crush him and consume his divine sense. This was not a case of Ghost Mother ignoring the height of the heavens and the breadth of the earth. She had been in a state of slumber for a long time, and despite having consumed much of Gongsun Wanner's consciousness, had not pinned down her true soul. As such, Ghost Mother had no idea that Bai Xiaochun had already become the Arch-Emperor. "You've bitten off a bit more than you can chew," Bai Xiaochun replied, eyeing Ghost Mother coldly. Then he reached out, unleashing his undying Emperor's fist. He didn't resort to his sovereign's fist, as that was unnecessary. Even still, it caused massive waves to roll out across the sea of consciousness. That, Ghost Mother's face fell as she retreated. However, she moved too slowly, and the shadowy Emperor joined Bai Xiaochun to strike her with heaven-shaking, earth-shattering force. Deafening rumbling sounds could be heard. This was Ghost Mother's sea of consciousness, and she had the advantage, having just consumed Gongsun Wanner, giving her the ability to unleash the power of the mid-celestial realm. Despite that, when facing cultivation base power like this, she was defeated instantly. Ghost Mother screamed as the gigantic figure made of black water collapsed, and her consciousness shattered into thousands of evil ghosts that began to flee in all directions. Bai Xiaochun ignored them. If he wanted to, he could track them down with minimal effort. But the most important thing was to find Gongsun Wanner's true soul. He had been able to tell earlier that Ghost Mother had consumed much of Gongsun Wanner's consciousness, but not her true soul. Otherwise, she wouldn't have attacked him so recklessly. With Ghost Mother's consciousness having been shattered, the sea below was not black but nearly transparent. Without any hesitation, he shot down into it and sent his divine sense out to search for Gongsun Wanner. Occasionally he would encounter the evil ghosts that were fragments of Ghost Mother's consciousness, which he would destroy and feed back into the sea of consciousness. It didn't take long before his divine sense locked down onto something at the bottom of the sea, a huge sword. Bai Xiaochun immediately recognized it. It was the fallen sword from the Heavenspan realm, which had once been a prized possession of Gu Tianjun. It looked exactly the same as Bai Xiaochun remembered it, and he could even see gaps and cracks on its surface, within which was the fallen sword abyss. He moved in a blur, appearing next to the sword. Right now, the sense he got from the sword was very different than back when he had been in the chi condensation stage, fighting with Song Ke over heaven string energy. Pushing such thoughts aside, he approached one of the gaps and entered the fallen sword abyss. Inside were thick mists, filled with howling cries that reminded him of the bane souls of the past. Ignoring such cries, he followed the sensations he received through his divine sense until he reached a certain mist-filled valley. After entering the valley, he breathed a sigh of relief upon seeing a trembling little girl huddling in a far corner, clad in a long white garment. That little girl was the true soul of Gongsun Wanner. Apparently, having lost much of her consciousness, she had also been bereft of most of her memories. She was also incredibly weak. When she sensed Bai Xiaochun, she looked up, fear in her eyes. "Sweetie, are you going to eat me?" Bai Xiaochun sighed, immediately taking pity on her. Shaking his head, he slowly approached, whereupon the girl wrapped her arms around his leg. "There are a lot of ghosts out there, sweetie. It's really scary. Why don't you hide here with me?" Squatting down, he looked at her, his eyes soft as he said, "Don't be afraid, Wanner. Let me get you out of here, okay?" She shivered, memories beginning to trickle back into her mind. For some unknown reason, she instinctively trusted this young man. A moment passed, and she nodded. However, she gripped his hand tightly, and was clearly not willing to let go of it. Holding her hand, he led her out of the fallen sword abyss. As soon as they appeared back out in the sea of consciousness, the numerous evil ghosts suddenly went crazy, and began to fly toward her with mouths wide open. But with Bai Xiaochun there, they had no hope of consuming her. As they neared, they screamed and shattered. Before long, he had destroyed all of them. With each one that vanished, Gongsun Wanner's consciousness began to return to her. Soon, she closed her eyes. However, her hand continued to grip Bai Xiaochun's hand tightly. Bai Xiaochun was still worried. Sending his divine sense out, he reconfirmed that all of the traces of Ghost Mother had been completely destroyed. Smiling, he sent his divine sense back into his body. In Gongsun Wanner's chamber, he shivered as he awoke. Reaching out, he touched the top of Gongsun Wanner's head with his index finger and gently pushed down. Just as he was pulling it away, Gongsun Wanner suddenly reached up and clasped his hand. Her eyelashes fluttered, and she slowly opened her eyes. Smiling warmly, she spoke, a slight, teasing tone in her voice. Thank you, sweetie. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.